You hear the first scream before you see the fire. It slices through the night like something alive, trembling, desperate, and quickly swallowed by the roar of flames devouring wooden roofs. You stand in the narrow street of Béziers, the air thick with smoke and the metallic taste of blood. The torchlight flickers across bodies you step over, the stones slick beneath your boots. You don't know whose voice shouted it, a crusader knight, a priest, or perhaps someone drunk on divine fury, but the words echo through the chaos around you. Kill them all, God will know his own. And in that moment, you understand you are witnessing not a battle, but the erasure of a city. You can smell the burning, wool, timber, flesh, all indistinguishable. And through the haze you glimpse the soldiers moving like a single monstrous entity, cutting down Cathars and Catholics alike. For mercy is a luxury no one intends to grant tonight. As you push deeper into the streets, past the church where families cling to each other in their final prayers, the truth settles hot in your chest. History will remember Béziers, 1209, as a massacre written in fire. Only later will you learn the politics behind this night, how Pope Innocent III launched the Albigensian Crusade to crush what he called a heresy spreading through Languedoc, how the nobles of southern France found themselves entangled between faith and ambition, how ordinary people, the ones whose faces you now see frozen in terror, became victims of power struggling to shape a continent. But now, in this moment, all you feel is heat and the tremor of distant, collapsing walls. You stumble past a man kneeling beside the body of a child. His tears cut clean streaks through the soot on his face. When he lifts his eyes to you, they hold no accusation, only emptiness, as though everything that anchored him to life has already been taken. You want to speak, to tell him something that will matter, but before you can, another explosion of screams echoes from the direction of the cathedral. You hear the crash of the great doors giving way, followed by the unmistakable sound of slaughter within a sacred place. History books will later call this the sack of Béziers. But standing here, surrounded by the dust of a civilization collapsing in a single day, you understand that words like sack or campaign or crusade cannot contain the weight of what you witness. This is the moment when faith becomes a blade. As you try to leave the city, you find yourself remembering other massacres whispered across medieval Europe, memories etched somewhere deep, rising now like ghosts in the smoke. You recall the Mongol sieges, where entire towns vanished beneath the hooves of unstoppable armies. The massacre at Jerusalem in 1099, where crusaders waded through blood inside the Holy City. The harrowing accounts of the Black Dinner in Scotland, where hospitality turned into murder. The Lithuanian forest raids, where pagans and Christians tore each other apart without mercy. You realize Béziers is not a singular tragedy. It is a chapter in a long, brutal saga written by fear, power, and conviction. And yet, even in the horror, you see fragments of humanity trying to survive. A mother shielding her child with her own body. A priest guiding wounded villagers toward the river. A young soldier hesitating before striking down someone he recognizes from his childhood. These moments of resistance, small and fragile, feel like candles flickering against an overwhelming storm. Centuries from now, historians will debate numbers. They'll trace political motives, papal decrees, noble rivalries. They'll categorize, analyze, and place this massacre inside the larger machinery of medieval power struggles. But what they cannot truly capture is the sensation that grips you now. The suffocating heat, the terror, the helplessness, the realization that civilization is far more fragile than it pretends to be. As dawn approaches, the fire weakens, leaving behind a city turned to ash. You walk among the ruins, stepping across remnants of homes, workshops, and markets, the fragments of lives erased in a single night. Smoke drifts upward into a sky just beginning to brighten, as if the world is trying to forget what happened before the sun fully rises. You pause at the broken steps of the cathedral. Charred beams creak gently in the wind, and for a moment, there is silence. Not peaceful, but hollow, like the world holding its breath. You realize then that medieval massacres were never just events. They were warnings carved into the memory of human history. Warnings about belief without restraint, power without conscience, leaders who mistake violence for righteousness. And as you leave Béziers behind, carrying the smell of smoke on your clothes and the echo of that first scream in your mind, you understand why these stories must be told. Because even centuries later, the fires still burn. You continue walking through the ruins long after the sun rises, and the light only makes the devastation clearer. You step past the remnants of market stalls, their wooden frames collapsed like broken bones, and you can almost hear echoes of the voices that once filled this place. Merchants arguing over prices, children playing between the carts, women calling out the day's bread. Now the only sound is the soft hiss of smoke rising from charred timbers and the distant cawing of crows. You find yourself drawn toward the city gates, where bodies lie scattered in tangled heaps. Some still grip tools instead of weapons. Carpenters, potters, shepherds. People who had no stake in the crusade beyond the misfortune of living in the path of its fury. You realize that medieval massacres often had little to do with armies clashing and everything to do with what happened next, when the victors no longer saw the defeated as human. You wonder how many of these people even understood why they were killed. A knight passes you, his sword still wet, his armor splattered with soot and blood. His face is blank, unreadable. He walks stiffly, as if carrying a weight heavier than the steel on his shoulders. You follow him with your eyes and notice how he pauses when a child's doll falls from the rubble beside him, its cloth singed, its colors faded. For a moment he hesitates, then he turns away and continues walking. You realize that even the perpetrators of massacres carry scars that no historian will ever record. As you leave Béziers behind, you feel the road trembling beneath your feet, as though the earth remembers every step of the crusading armies that once marched through these lands. You think of other places where the cries of the innocent were swallowed by the ambitions of the powerful. The massacre of Limoges in 1370, when the Black Prince's forces stormed a city that believed they would show mercy. The sacking of Magdeburg during the 30 Years' War, where the entire population seemed to vanish in a single inferno. The Mongol destruction of Nishapur, where even the memory of resistance was buried beneath the ruins. At each place, a pattern repeats. Leaders speak of righteousness, soldiers speak of orders, and the powerless speak only in their final moments. As you descend a dirt path into the countryside, you join a group of survivors. They move like shadows, silent, hollow-eyed, clutching whatever they manage to salvage. An elderly woman holds a small chest tight against her body. A young man holds his injured brother on his back. A mother carries her infant, her steps weak but determined. When they look at you, their eyes search your face not for answers, but for the simple assurance that someone else has survived. You travel with them for hours, listening to their fragmented stories. One man speaks of hiding beneath his floorboards as the soldiers ransack the house above him. A girl describes escaping through a back alley just before it collapsed in flames. A baker whispers that he saw his entire workshop reduced to embers in minutes, the place where his father taught him how to work dough by morning light. Their voices break, not from fear, but from the realization that everything they were, their lineage, their craft, their identity, has been swallowed by a single night. As evening falls, you reach the edge of a forest. The survivors settle beneath the trees, lighting a small fire that flickers weakly in the wind. You sit with them, feeling the weight of what you've witnessed pressing against your ribs. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howl, a reminder that the medieval world is indifferent to human suffering, offering no safety beyond what people carve out for themselves. You think of how chroniclers will one day describe this massacre with a few lines of ink, perhaps even a footnote. You wonder if any of them will imagine the smell of burning grain or the sound of a mother calling for a child she cannot find. Perhaps they will record the name of the commanding bishop, or the number of casualties, or the strategic victory gained by the Crusaders, but they will not capture the way the night sky glowed red, or how the screams seemed to rise and fall like waves. You lie awake beneath the trees, staring at the stars. You imagine that somewhere, far beyond this forest, someone else is staring at the same sky. A knight, a priest, a noble plotting the next move in the crusade. They will continue to shape history with decisions made in halls far removed from the people who bleed for them. And you realize that massacres are not accidents of the medieval world. They are the consequences of choices. Choices made by those who believe their cause is righteous enough to justify anything, even the erasure of entire communities. As dawn approaches once more, the survivors gather their few belongings and prepare to move on. You rise with them, your legs heavy but steady. You take one last look back at the direction of Béziers, now just a distant memory obscured by trees and smoke. You understand then that history is not written only by victors or scholars, but by those who endure, those who walk away from ruins carrying stories that refuse to die. You step onto the path, knowing that thousands of others across the medieval world once walked similar roads, leaving behind cities that burned, walls that collapsed, and futures that vanished in a single night. And as you continue forward, you realize the true horror of medieval massacres is not that they happened, but how easily they could happen again.
You wake to the soft hush of wind moving through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of ash still clinging to your clothes. The survivors rise slowly, their movements quiet, as if the forest itself is listening. You stand beside them, feeling the weight of everything you have witnessed settling deeper into your chest. You know the road ahead will not offer answers, only distance. But distance is the first mercy any survivor receives. As you walk, the forest begins to thin, revealing rolling fields once tended by the very people who now travel beside you. You imagine these lands before the crusade, vineyards stretching toward the horizon, small villages filled with laughter, songs drifting from taverns at dusk. Now the vines are trampled, the barns abandoned, the fields left to the wind. You realize that a massacre does not end when the killing stops. It echoes through the landscape long after the swords are sheathed. A young boy, no older than 10, walks beside you. His face is smudged with soot, his clothes torn, but his eyes remain alert, searching the road ahead with a determination far beyond his years. You ask him quietly if he remembers what happened, and he only nods. When he finally speaks, his voice is steady, almost too calm. "I want to remember," he says. "Someone has to." And in that moment, you understand that memory itself becomes a form of resistance. As the sun climbs higher, you reach a small hill overlooking a quiet valley. The survivors stop to rest. You sit slightly apart, watching the wind roll through the grass like a living thing. For the first time since Béziers burned, the world feels still, almost peaceful. And in that stillness, a question arises within you, one that medieval history rarely asks, one that chronicles almost never consider. How does a society rebuild after a night like that? You think of how some will attempt to start again, planting new seeds where old ones were lost. Others will carry their grief into distant towns, their stories becoming warnings whispered around hearth fires. And some will never speak of what happened, burying the memory as deeply as the dead they left behind. Yet all of them, whether they realize it or not, will be the ones who shape the next chapter of history. The crusade will continue, driven by ambition dressed in the language of salvation. More sieges will follow, more cities will burn, and chroniclers will ink their verdicts in elegant Latin phrases that hide more than they reveal. But the people who lived through these massacres, the farmers, the artisans, the mothers, the children, they are the true authors of the medieval world's sorrow and resilience. Their footsteps are the ones that carry history forward. You rise from the hillside and join the others. The group begins moving again, their shadows stretching long across the grass. As you walk, You realize that you have crossed a threshold, not of geography, but of understanding. You have seen what righteousness looks like when corrupted by power. You have felt the heat of a city burning for reasons its people never chose. You have witnessed how fear can become a language, spoken fluently by those who seek control. But you have also seen something else: the quiet, stubborn endurance of those who refuse to be erased. And that is why this story matters. Not because Béziers burned, but because someone survived to remember that it did. As the road carries you and the survivors toward an uncertain horizon, the final image of the city drifts through your mind, flames reaching into the sky, and above them, a darkness deeper than night. You close your eyes and let the memory settle, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. Because history is not only the story of those who destroy, it is also the story of those who live on, carrying truth in their footsteps. You turn your gaze toward the path ahead, and with a breath that tastes of smoke and morning air, you continue walking. This is where the story ends, but the echoes of medieval massacres continue to shape the world we inherit today.